So the problem off the bat with diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives is these are three words that sound really good. If you say to somebody, we want to make the workplace more diverse, anybody's immediate response is, well, of course, why wouldn't we? But the problem is, and we've seen this particularly in the last 2 years, when they're saying we want to make the workplace diverse, they're thinking about one kind of diversity. I happen to work in theater, and I started doing that work in 2002. I have several different part-time jobs, and one of my jobs is being a teaching artist at the New Victory Theater, which is part of a larger organization called New 42. One thing that happened after the murder of George Floyd is that a lot of cultural institutions decided to make a statement. Someone who worked at New 42 that I had never met before had some problems with the statement. So what this person did was this person decided to email the entire staff to detail everything that he felt was wrong with the statement, and then to articulate some other grievances he had, and then to send resources to us. One of them was about police abolition. Immediately, there was a response, somebody affirming what the first person said. And then it was email after email after email affirming. And one of the ones that was so frightening was one of my coworkers sent an email affirming the first email, and then it said, and I look forward to the responses from everybody else who has not yet responded. And that really sent a chill down my spine, because I went, oh, we're being watched. And the threat is always that you're gonna get accused of being a racist if you don't agree with what's being said. There's a play by Arthur Miller called The Crucible. In The Crucible, Arthur Miller dramatizes the Salem witch trials as a metaphor for what happened during the McCarthy era. And one of the things that's happening during the Salem witch trials is people are falsely accusing other people of being a witch. And then saying, I'm not a witch, actually makes it worse. This thing with accusing people of racism in the theater is the same thing that happens in The Crucible. And it was shocking to me to see people acting out the Crucible in real life who know better than to behave that way. During the summer of 2020, the Smithsonian put out an infographic about white culture, and it had a lot of stereotypes in it. They were inappropriate, they were discriminatory. It's embarrassing that the Smithsonian did that. However, the Smithsonian stepped up and they did the right thing, and they took it down and they apologized and they agreed that it was not appropriate. So I was shocked when, in the fall of 2020, New 42 let staff lead a diversity, equity, and inclusion workshop, and they presented that same information from that Smithsonian infographic at work. So I'm seeing my coworkers present grand sweeping statements about all white people that are pretty negative. The executive vice president sitting there saying nothing. We've already had this thing happen around the bullying, so you know what the consequences are. Even though they keep saying over and over again, respect differences. Well, what space is there to voice a difference of opinion if you're coming in with this race essentialist stereotyping information from an infographic that even the Smithsonian said was inappropriate? One of the things that the DEI subcommittee was asked to do was to create an overall DEI plan for New 42. And we were called into a meeting to give our input on this plan. They're showing us this document of all the work that had been done, and then we were going to get broken off into smaller groups to give more detailed feedback on a specific part of this plan. Right before we were supposed to go into breakout groups, one of my coworkers voiced her upset at both the plan and the manner in which the plan was presented. She didn't like either.
Hey guys, it's Rachel Grace. I can't get my camera to come on, so apologies. But I feel like I wouldn't be my authentic self if I didn't speak honestly. I'm actually very hurt by how this is all going down. Well, and by now, I think everyone, if you didn't know already, you know by now, I'm a very radical person. Now, I've been in classrooms for all these years, watching as I sometimes have to train my wonderful non-Black whatever colleagues on how to act in big classrooms. Right now, the model is skewed because everyone who's coming up with a solution has been part of the problem. And that to me is what being an artivist is. And yeah, it's real. You're gonna see things you don't like about yourselves either. That's part of decolonizing. I'm doing it too. My mother's half white. Critical race theory. We have the resources.
When the meeting finally ended, I thought, okay, cooler heads are gonna prevail. 30 minutes later, I got an email about that meeting from one of my coworkers, and the email was addressed to all the non-Black participants of the meeting. She's saying that because our coworker did the additional labor of speaking up, that we should pay her our meeting fee as a form of interpersonal reparations. Okay, this stuff destroys relationships. The teaching artists at New Victory get paired up, and sometimes I've taught with somebody once and then I haven't taught with them again for 2 years. But I did teach with Rachel a couple of times, and it might have been the very first time I ever taught with her. She was telling me about some difficulties she had with her father who was ill. And I said to her, Rachel, I have somebody in my life who is also dying of dementia, and I know how hard that is. I know it's harder on the family members than it is on the person who has dementia, because that person doesn't know. And then a couple days later, Rachel and I had to do this circus workshop. We were in the hallway filling out the teacher evaluation. She said to me, I just want to thank you. And I said, well, for what? She said, my father died this morning. And I wasn't thinking that I was doing anything else other than my job that morning. But I can imagine if a loved one had died and then you had to go into work, that would be really hard to do. And then the third step was they hired a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultancy called Glasgow Group. And one of the first things I saw was one of the consultants, Tony Graves, presenting a workshop about your thinking, about how your identity is developed. And she's presenting all this research about how all Asian people's identity is developed, and how all white people's identity is developed, and how all Black people's identity is developed. And she herself she spoke on behalf of all Black people. Shortly thereafter, I got an email from FAIR that had video of Rodney Glasgow, who's the head of Glasgow Group, on tape bragging that when he sees upset people, that is evidence to him that his methods are working.
The upset that we're seeing is because we're doing the work. If you are doing this work and not hitting the resistance, then you're not doing the work, you're not changing the system.
Relationships are built over time. And then you bring in these DEI consultants whose main goal it is to upset you, who makes the work environment divisive, I submitted a letter to Human Resources. I thought there was a possibility that Human Resources would read this letter and call me up and say, hey, we're surprised to get this. What's going on? That's not what they did. They hired an attorney to investigate. Even though they've said over and over, respect difference. My understanding is that when you get a complaint about a racially hostile work environment in Human Resources, that you've got to make the racially hostile work environment stop. That's not what New 42 did. They doubled down. They circulated a document by an author called Tema Okun, and they highlighted specific sections of this document that they wanted us to read. One of the highlighted sections said whiteness is a death sentence. Do they also want the children of New York City to know this? Why are they sending that around to the staff if they don't? I think one of the things that's particularly pernicious about this belief system is that it has a way of twisting people's goodwill on its head. Like, people don't want to be mean. And the hardcore activists in this belief system, they know that. So I think there's a lot of people who know this is wrong and are either afraid to speak out, or they think they're being helpful by not speaking out. Or, I was told by one person, this will pass. We've seen things like this before. This will pass. I'm not so certain. I don't know. I mean, again, to come back to the crucible, it's like, if you were living at a time when the crucible happened, would you stand by and let it happen? Or would you stand up and say something? One of the things that I wanted my whole life was to be just like everybody else. When I was young, I was often teased about being gay, often. There was a considerable amount of bullying going on. And I just wanted to be like everybody else. A lot has been achieved. So now I am just like everybody else. And it's time to live a life of joy and fulfillment and not use my identity as a cudgel, especially not at work. I've been swimming in this for so long, sometimes it's hard to imagine that it could be different. But I certainly hope that we come out on the other side of it, and then when we get there, just like Arthur Miller did, we can look back on this period of history and make some really great art about it that warns people in the future to never, ever do this again.